and really wanted to preach on this, but this is like a chapter long. And so we read this middle section here to kind of show the meat of what's going on. Jesus had already been away from Bethany. He had been there previously. He had hung out with Lazarus and his family, with Mary and Martha. We hadn't quite come to the scene yet where he had been anointed with oil and his head and his feet had been cleaned by Mary. And you know that whole scene where Mary and Martha kind of get in that scuffle and they start arguing about stuff. Hadn't been there yet. But he had already been there and amongst Lazarus and Mary and Martha and many others. And then he had gone away. He left. And he gets word eventually on that road where he had been away that Lazarus is very sick. And that in fact he's going to die. And he's there and he hears this word and he stays away from Bethany for 2 more days. He's heard that he's sick. You know, Lazarus is in the emergency room. And he stays gone. He fails pastoral care. Isn't that crazy? Jesus doesn't respond immediately. It's like I ought to take notes or something. I don't know. It's just what he does. And then he finally says, you know, we ought to go back to Jerusalem. And the disciples are like, well, Master, as we're going back to Jerusalem, that's when you get in trouble. The last time we were in that area, they tried to stone you. They tried to kill us all. He says, yeah, well, we need to go anyway. And then they kind of get together and they say, well, if the Master's going to go and die, we ought to go die with him. That seems like a great idea. So anyway, they go back to Bethany. And that's where this scene starts, where we have Jesus coming to the house of Lazarus, and he hadn't even made it there yet. And Martha, who apparently knows this guy pretty well, comes to meet him before he ever gets close into the innards of the village. And Martha comes out and meets him and says, Master, where have you been? If you had been here, he wouldn't have died. She kind of crosses her arms, does this thing, starts looking at him. Not quite the posture I would take with Jesus. You know what I mean? But Martha does that. Martha comes up and says, where have you been? If you had been here, he never would have died. He just would have had a cold. You would have waved your hand, said a prayer, it would have been all right. And yet that's not what happens. And Jesus is taken back by this. And eventually Martha goes back and calls to Mary, and Mary comes out and says the exact same thing to Jesus. She says, if you had just come here, if you had just made it into the town and made it back to Lazarus 2 days ago when we first sent word to you, he wouldn't be dead right now. They're blaming Jesus for Lazarus being dead. You know, I had the privilege about 2 years ago, it's almost been 3 now, of going to Sudan. How many of you all have heard about what we in the Holston Conference have been doing in the Sudan? We've been going back and forth there now almost 5 years. We just sent 2 new missionaries to lead up that district. It's the 13th district now of the Holston Annual Conference there in Ye, Sudan, and it's Fred and Libby Deering that have gone. And back in 2009, when Fred Deering was my district superintendent, he asked me to go to Sudan with him. And I was pretty ecstatic about that, but I told him, I was like, well, I don't know, I'd better be smart and ask my wife first, because she might have something to say about that. And that conversation went the way it normally goes. I came in the house and I said, well, I think I'm going to the Sudan. And she just kind of looked at me and was like, oh, you are? Is that right? I was like, yeah, I'll be there 15 days. Well, is it safe? Oh, yeah, of course it's safe. It's just the Sudan. It'll be fine. No problems. Come back and I'm telling, stories of gunfire and, eating weird goat. And anyway, it was all kinds of fun stuff like that. But we went, and I was there with Fred Deering to do pastoral training. We had like 52 pastors, lay people included, women and men, everything in Sudan. And we're doing that, but a part of that was also a medical mission portion. We were there to we ended up treating, I think, around 3,000 people in the course of 6 days. And it was a pharmacy, full clinic, the whole deal. And we received a lot of children, as you would imagine. And there was one day this kid named Raphael and his mother come up. And the mom wasn't really his mom. It was actually his aunt. The mom had already died, and she brings up Raphael, and it was pretty dire when he came up. He was one of these guys that, his stomach was about out to here because he had the protein deficiency thing. He was about 5 years old or so at the time, and he came in and he had all kinds of skin issues, and it was bad. It was really bad. He was eaten up with malaria, very dire. He comes in, and one of the physicians that we had immediately says to the aunt, "You've got to get this kid back into town and bring him to a full clinic. We don't have the facilities here to care for him." And so they rushed Raphael out. Danny Howe, who's there with us, he gets in the truck and he had to rush him back to the hospital. He gets to the hospital and they admit the kid. And the kid comes in and sees this bed there. That's just the wire frame, just the spring, and that's it. And, Danny looks at the clinic people, the clinicians, and he says, "Well, where's the mattress? Where's the sheets and all?" I was like, "Oh, well, you got to buy your own." And so he takes the kid back into the bus, goes back out, barters off something to get, a mattress and some sheets and, all the things that you have, comes back, and they lay him down, and then nothing happens. He says, "Well, where's the IV? This kid's dehydrated. This kid needs medicine." "Oh, well, you got to go buy that too." He leaves the kids there. He goes back out to the local pharmacy, which is really rough, by the way. And he buys all the IVs, he buys the bags, everything you got to buy that we would typically expect, standard in like an ER, any kind of a waiting room or doctor's office, one of those things. He has to go and buy that, brings it back, hooks him up, tears in his eyes, all torn up, comes back to the clinic. There's nothing else he can do. About 6 hours later, we're walking to go to this place called the Green Mango, which was basically the bar. But it was the only place where there was something to eat and something to drink, and all the bishops had shown up. So, I was in my fresh Columbia fishing outfit because that's what we wore while we were in Sudan because it was really hot. And I was ready for, the bishop can say, "Good job, good and faithful servant." And instead on the road, this aunt has been running around Ye looking for us, trying to find where we were to get us to help. And she comes and she finally finds us walking down that road. And she says, "You've got to come back to the clinic. He stopped breathing." And we just asked her, "How long have you been looking for us?" And she said, "Well, it's been about 2 hours." And, we already know this is not going to end well. But we get her in the back of the truck. We drive off, going down these streets that have been riddled through flash flooding and through bombs. And so you have craters in the middle of the road that are just horrible. And we're going down the road, and we finally get to the clinic. And this clinic, it's anything but. And you already have somewhat of a description. But it's one of these places where, I'll never forget it, I'm walking through the gate coming into this compound that they call their hospital. And we're coming around to the children's ward, and there's this huge, giant mango tree. Anybody here ever seen just a big mango tree, the way that looks? You know what I mean? It's just massive mango tree there, and it's a beautiful tree. But it's like as soon as you pass that mango tree and you get to the entrance, you get hit with this smell. And, at first, it's kind of like what you would expect when, the smell of a slaughterhouse, during that time of year when, they're getting the McDonald's hamburger stuff ready, you know what I'm talking about? You got that smell, that hits us, and then that mixes in with this other smell that I'm not going to say in church. And you start to realize, wow, that's not the way it's supposed to be. And it finally occurs to me, that's not just a bad smell, that's the smell of death. And we come around and we go up this catwalk into the kids' ward. And the aunt got into there before any of us did. And the first thing I hear is her just start wailing. And it's right then that we knew that Raphael died. That's when we knew he died. And it was me and Danny and Harry Howe, and we go in to that poorly constructed clinic, which, by the way, has about 70 patients in it, and it's about half the size of this room. And the first thing I see is Raphael laying there on his bed. This little 5-year-old kid laying on his bed. And all we know to do is just look at him and think, what do we do? And so we go in there and we kneel down, and the doctors were at that point just preparing the body. Takes the gauze, wraps it around the feet, wraps the gauze around the kid's head, keep the mouth shut. And then I was asked to start to pray in that moment. And I start praying, and this place is normally really noisy. I mean, just full of sound. It is absolutely just littered with sound. And it's like as soon as I stopped praying, everything stopped. Everybody stopped. The noise stopped. All the chatter stopped. Everything stopped. And I don't have a clue what I said. But I do remember it being dead silent. There was some realization amongst those people that it wasn't supposed to be this way. That there was something wrong. That in a place where on that day, Raphael was the 7th child to die, and it was about 5 in the afternoon at that point. That in a place where typically this is an understood, normal kind of thing for children and people to die, horrible deaths, there was this respect and understanding that this ain't the way it's supposed to be. It's just not the way it's supposed to go down. I remember going out from the compound and looking across to another ward, and they were tossing more bodies in the back of a pickup truck because more had died. Now, when Jesus finally does show up there in Bethany, and he gets past Mary and Martha and all of their, being upset with him because he hadn't come in enough time, he comes in and he says, well, I think it'll be all right. Cast the stone aside. And they say, no, you got to stop doing that. You can't do that, Jesus. What do you mean cast the stone aside? It's already been 4 days. He stinks by now. I mean, it's starting to smell by now. We don't want that to get out. He smelled bad enough before he died. He's going to be even worse now. That's not in the scripture, by the way. I'm just kind of putting that in there. And he says, now look, this is happening. And he tells his disciples this. This is happening in order that all who are here and witness it may know who I am. Take the stone away. And he looks up to heaven. And he says this, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me. And when he had said this, he called into the tomb, with the fumes and everything coming out, and all the people gathered round, and by this point, it was probably pretty quiet. And he calls into the tomb, and he says, Lazarus, come out. And Lazarus, almost all mummified, comes out. And he says, now take the garments off of him and let him go. And Lazarus gets out of the tomb, and he goes out. Mary and Martha said, yeah, we believe in the resurrection. Because at that point in Jewish history, there was still an expectation that on the last day, there would be a resurrection. But Jesus says, but I am the resurrection and the life. And all who believe in me will have life eternal. Resurrection is not something for a future date, but you are going to see it today, here in this place, in front of you, right now. And he calls unto Lazarus and he says, come out. And Lazarus raises from the dead and comes out and freaks the people out of their underpants. They don't know what to do about this thing. Lazarus comes out and he's going around and people are just, oh my gosh, what are we going to do now? This Jesus has finally showed up. He didn't show up when we thought he was going to, but now that he's here, he's actually raising these dead people. What's going to happen next? Now, the fact of the matter is, folks, you don't have to go to Sudan to witness horror in this world. You don't even have to read it in the scriptures. You just have to wake up each and every morning and look around us. Do we not? Our youth this past week, you went to Welch, right? Aaron, apparently, happy birthday, good job, has been transformed in a way because of what he's seen in that place. Any of our youth seen that and felt that way too? It's like when you get put in relationship with people that are that much different than you, when you get put in relationship with others that are maybe more poor than you are, and maybe when you get put in relationship with others that are, as the world sees it, better off than you, you start to see something about yourself and see something about God that you'd never seen before. And before you know it, all this crud that's in you doesn't seem so cruddy anymore, and all the stuff that's built up in you doesn't seem so bad anymore. And here's the thing, folks. We all are in need today of a little bit of resurrection, are we not? Are we not? And the thing about that whole resurrection thing is that we don't all just get sick and then die because, something was going around and it just happened to hit us. Folks, I am far, very far, very far from perfection. I'm working on it. My wife's closer than I am. I kind of have to say that, but she really is. My kids are probably even closer than that, but they get a bye, right? But a lot of the times when we are dying to self and when we're putting this crud in our life, it's not anybody else than us who are doing it to ourselves, is it not? I mean, let's be honest. Yes, there are times in our lives when, things are just bad. Some of us felt that pretty hard in 2008, did we not? And some of us have been feeling that pretty hard ever since. And some of us can think of times in our lives when, it's just like nothing would go right no matter how hard we tried. Has anybody ever felt that way? Anybody? Is everything always gone hunky-dory for you all? I don't know. It hadn't been that way for me. I'm not that old. But see, most of the time anyway, the real crud in life is because of my own sin. Most of the stuff that ails us is because I've made bad choices. I've made poor decisions. Most of the time, when I find myself at my lowest, I've got no one else to blame but me. And that's when I have to say to this Jesus and to the Marys and Marthas of this world that even though it is the fourth day, and even though I already stink to high heaven, and even though no one wants to be around me anymore, even though it's a lost cause, even though no one believes anybody can make anything of this mess, even though the whole world is saying you are in over your head, and there is nothing that you can do to make this right, Jesus is going to show up. And He's not going to show up too late. He's going to show up just in time. Now, granted, He ain't going to show up just when I wanted Him to. That's not how it works, unfortunately. But He does show up exactly when He needs to. And when He shows up, He's going to say, Andrew, you better come out. He's going to say, Pete, come on out. He's going to say to Aaron, I know your finger about fell off and they glued it back on, but it's time to come out and get off your butt. Jesus is going to show up and He's going to say, come out and go out in the world and live, because it's out there, folks. It's out there amongst everyone else, not just in this place. I love this place. We get to come here, and we get to fellowship, and we get to worship, and we get to support one another, and we get to pray, and we get to be, safe, whatever that means. But this ain't where the ministry is, folks. It's just not where it is. Now, ministry happened in this place. It'll happen through the way we engage with one another. It'll happen by the way people come into this place and they get to meet God in a way they never do. But I think we ought to have at least one goal for ourselves. It's that we try and bring those who have not found Jesus here so they can meet Him. And then those of you who have already found Him, we need to kick you right back out so you can go and say, Lazarus is raised. Jesus has worked in my life and all this dead stuff in me has been resurrected. We're going to go out and we're going to be in mission and ministry to the world. Our mission No committees, no crazy scheme. Our mission is simply this. Write it down. We are here to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of this world. Not just to make disciples of Jesus Christ to sit here and be all happy with one another, but to make disciples of Jesus Christ that go back out and transform the world for the gospel of Jesus Christ. That is the only reason we are here. Everything else is just, we're in church. Let's say fluff. That's what we're here to do. And this morning, if you've still got that dead stuff in you, this morning, if you've still got stuff that, man, is pent up and you don't know what to deal with it, if this morning you need Jesus to say to you, come out, we have the opportunity to respond by being recreated in His image, and that image which He intends for us. And so Christ our Lord invites to His table